Welcome to the Long Blunt Bob live model demo. We're going to cut this bob just like a regular blunt bob, but we're going to use the clippers to make the line and the edge really sharp. So first we're going to wet down the hair slightly. You can also do this cut dry as well. I'm wetting it down just so that I can manage her hair a little bit easier. She does have quite thick hair and it has been permed, as you'll see as I cut it. So the perm makes the hair quite difficult to work with due to the thickness and the texture. However, because we're using the clippers for this cut, we're able to get a nice blunt line. So we're going to start off with our nape section, and you want your sections as clean as possible, so we're going to even those out as best we can. Her hair is quite difficult to comb, and we are cleaning up the line after this. So what I'm doing right now is I'm measuring the front pieces, so I'm going to cut her length at an A-line shape. So I'm cutting the back slightly shorter, and I'm just getting that hair cut short because I'm going to create a line, and then I'm going to make the line really sharp with my clippers after. So what I'm doing right now is I'm getting that A-line shape, and I'm using my eyes as a guide in order to match the back in that A-line shape, and I'm just using my eyes to create the shape. So that's where we're going creative, but I'm going to show you how to tailor that length in the back with the clippers. So just like a regular blunt cut, especially on the bob, which you've seen in the previous video, we go parallel sections up to the top of the head, and we create the cut based on the regular part line. So each section is parallel to the other, moving up to the top of the head. And her hair, depending on the thickness of the hair, you need to take thinner sections if the hair is quite dense. Here we're working with very dense hair that's also been permed, so I have to take relatively thin sections and only cut when you can see the guide. So it's a little difficult to see in the video, but you can see my guide here, and I'm going as little tension as possible to get that line as straight as I can. We are doing a second part where we're cleaning up that line and making it even more blunt at the end. So there's no need to spend too much time getting it perfect, because I'm going to show you a really easy way to perfect your blunt line at the end. Right now we're just taking our parallel sections, we're cutting that A-line shape in to the bob, and the way that we determine our A-line angle is through our initial first sections, because our comb is always held parallel when we're cutting a bob to the section. So if your A-line shape, your finished look is quite short in the back, very long in the front, then your sections are going to look a little more angled than mine. And then you just hold the comb always parallel, and then you'll always make sure that your haircut is symmetrical and even, and it's got that nice sharp line. So now, once we get to the section right at the ear here, we're going to move above the ear. An option, if the hair is quite curly, an option right before at this point where I'm taking the section is to blow dry it with your Denman brush, because then we can match the hair up easier and get an even sharper line when the hair is drier underneath. But that's always optional. Depending on the age of your child or the person you're cutting hair on, sometimes not blow drying it is faster, and then you can just get that haircut done as quickly as possible. So what I'm doing here with my fingers is I am creating a nice sharp line with my fingers, but I always want to make sure I don't cut the majority of the hair off with my fingers. The hair will become uneven and choppy, and your line won't be completely blunt. So I use my fingers in order to just clean up the line, not to actually do the haircut. The haircut should always be done with no tension, using the wide tooth part of your comb. You don't want any pulling on the hair. So around the ear, it's very important because there's less density and the hair can do something called bounce back. So this usually happens right around the ear area, and you get what we refer to as a hole in hair cutting. You get a hole in the head. So you could look at your bob from the side and it'll sort of have a jump around the ear. And that's because the hair around the ear was cut with too much tension and then it sprung up. So I always use the wide tooth part of my comb. And what I'm doing here when I'm checking with my fingers is I'm just checking the line. I'm not pulling or creating tension on the hair. Zero tension. You can see that when I'm finished, there's no spring back. So right around the ear, I angle my fingers a little bit in order to preserve all that length in the front. And we've already determined that we're keeping the very front hair the same length. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just matching the back length to the front using my fingers and not creating any tension in the hair. So I comb the hair with the wide tooth part of my comb and I just comb it into my fingers. I don't pull on the hair while I'm combing it into my fingers. So we take that second section right above the ear now, parallel to the previous. And again, we're cutting with absolutely no tension. We're going to use the wide tooth part of our comb and always nice and clean sections here. Again, her hair is quite dense, and so I'm using my sectioning clip in order to create the sections in my haircut. And so you can tell here that the line I'm creating, you can see how much nicer it's getting, and we're getting that really blunt shape in the back due to the A-line sectioning we've done. Now I'm using my fingers here, and what I'm doing is I'm cutting just below my previous section, and I'm using my eyes to see how I'm doing that. So I'm cutting about 1 millimeter below the previous section, and I'll sometimes switch between my comb and my fingers here because the fingers sometimes is easier to get those little corners or those stubborn hairs, but sometimes with the comb it allows you to scoop more hair up, as I'm doing here, in order to get those stubborn hairs around the ears that sometimes you can't really see when you use your fingers to cut. I don't base the whole haircut using the fingers because you will get a heavier line in the back, not a nice clean sharp one. It'll be heavy and sort of choppy. And so by making sure you're using zero tension, you're not going to get that choppy, uneven look. And so right now I've cut 1 millimeter below my previous section. And I'm doing that here. So I'm combing the hair and cutting it 1 millimeter below my previous section. And then around the ear hair here, I over direct it slightly to the back and I angle my fingers. And again, I'm always cutting 1 millimeter below the previous section. And you can see how nice that is connecting into the front there. We haven't had to remove any length in the front for her. Now I've chosen not to blow dry my sections below the ears because the clipper detailing we're going to do at the end is going to be awesome. And so this is more of a sort of a quick pre-haircut, especially if you have a younger child or if they don't want to sit. Doing a haircut like this is very effective and it's very fast. So again, I've started out using my first initial sections. Those sections below the ear are very vital in the look of your haircut. So I always cut the sections below the ear with my comb exclusively. And as I move up to the top of the head, I use my fingers in order to control the hair and bring up my speed a little bit. And as well, to get that nice straight line. But you always have to remember when you're using your fingers to eyeball cut 1 millimeter below the previous section. When you dry the sections, you can see that previous section a lot easier because the hair is dry and then you're cutting the hair wet. So that makes it more effective. But again, I'm using my fingers here, which you want to proceed with caution when cutting bobs using your fingers because, like I've said, and I'm getting repetitive here, it can look quite heavy and choppy as you've all seen. So I'm always ensuring to drop that section that I'm cutting just slightly below 1 millimeter the previous. And you can see the style that I'm getting is taking shape here and it's looking nice and sharp. We're getting that really modern sort of collarbone length bob, which is very popular in Europe at the moment. It is 2020. We're just cutting those corners off and you can see that barely any length has to come off in the front. Again, I always drop that section that I'm cutting 1 millimeter below the previous. And as you get to the top sections, the hair is going to be slightly a little bit drier. It's going to be a little difficult to work with when her hair is quite thick, as you can see. But I only have to, you can clearly see my guideline here, and so it's super easy to just go in with your fingers and cut that hair, but ensure that you'll drop 1 millimeter below the previous, and then you won't get that heavy, choppy, cheap looking style. Bobs are pretty simple to cut once you get to know it, but you can get a very heavy, uneven look to your bob. And when I was learning how to cut hair, we used to blow dry each section as we cut it, and then we would check our haircut before we moved on to our next section. Because of the wet and dry hair, it's easy to see the hair that needs to be cut when it's wet. The only downfall to doing this is that wet hair does spring up and it does shrink when it becomes dry. So you really have to make sure you're always cutting that hair longer than the previous so that you don't get that bouncing, so that it compensates. So just go and connect the top section here. If more hair was being removed, you would be able to clearly see your guideline versus the hair that you need to cut. But we're just evening out the front here, so all you can see is just a little bit of a corner, and I'm following that line. But don't worry if your haircut's a little uneven. I'm being a little bit of a perfectionist here because I'm going to show you a really great way to make that line even sharper once we blow dry and style. So at this point, it's just getting that length off, getting the bob even, and almost creating a basis so that we can clean it up. And you'll be able to see how easy and simple that is with our wall peanut. So just go around the haircut, and what I'm doing is I'm just moving the hair and I'm disturbing the hair to see if any long pieces are falling out. And those I'm just trimming off with my fingers. Now we are going to start with our blow dry. We're going to do a smooth blow dry. So I'm going to use what's called a Denman brush. What a Denman brush does is it straightens the hair, but it doesn't create any roundness. I'm actually going to use my boar round brush here. So this brush is made with natural boar hair. It is not vegan, and the base of it is bamboo. And the reason why I use this particular round brush here is because I'm going to get more of a smooth blow dry. It won't round the hair too much, and I want the hair to be nice and straight and shiny. This is why I like to use a boar round brush, because it doesn't actually create tons of volume. It more is for smoothing, and it does it really fast. I find a Denman brush which I originally was going to use, or which most people use to blow dry bobs, they can just take a little bit longer and you don't get that smoothness and shine that you want with your bob haircut so that you can check the line. So I find with a Boar round brush, you can really get that hair smooth. As you can see here, all that perm hair has been smoothed and our look is starting to take shape. And while I'm blow drying, I always turn the brush towards the ends, as you can see here, because that helps smooth them out and detangle the hair. So now we've reached the top section. We're going to just blow dry that forward so that the hair lays nice and flat around her forehead. And again, I spin those ends because that helps smooth and detangle the hair, which is really important when you're checking, because the smoother the hair is, the easier it is to comb it when you're cutting. So to clean up the hairline, you can see I've tilted her head slightly forward, and from doing that you can see those long pieces, and I'm just going in with my wall and I'm just cutting them in to the hair, and that's all you need to do to straighten up that line. But the key is to get them to tuck their chin down, and what that does is it diffuses the hair over the back of the neck instead of making it fall in one place. And any long hairs, they fall out of the bottom, and instead of spending all this time trying to clean it up and cut it with your scissors, you can actually just go over that choppy line with your clippers, your wall, and your comb, as I'm doing here. I just put my comb where I want the line, and then I just cut straight in, much like we did on our short haircuts that you may have seen in a previous video. I'm using the wall peanut to sharpen up my bob line, and it's really effective, but the key is they have to tilt their head in different directions so that the hair diffuses. So right now, when I'm working the back, I have her hair tucked down to her chin. I have her chin tucked into her neck, and what that does is it diffuses the hair across the back of her neck. And so when we do the sides, we do ear to shoulder, so they just tilt their head slightly to the left or right, not tucked completely down, just slightly to the edge, slightly to the side, and then we can see more of that hair when you cut the opposite side. So when their head is tucked to the side, we go on the opposite side and use our clippers to cut, as you will see here. So she tucks her ear to her shoulder, and I go in, and now I can see exactly where that hair needs to be cut. Now you're just creating a straight line. You can see that the hair is slightly angled, but you're not taking any length off. You're just cutting off little straggly pieces of hair, which when she tilts her head and gets most of that length out of the way, you can easily see that. And so for those front stubborn hairs, just use your comb and your scissors. Sometimes you have to detail and be a little bit precise, and that's where the scissors come in. But as long as you do those head tilts, they will get that edge nice and sharp where you need it, which is the back and back and around the shoulders. In the front, we just match it. It's very, 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 very effective to get a nice sharp line. So you can see I've tilted her head again, and all that hair becomes exposed where we may have been a little uneven or a little fast in our cutting. Once she tilts her head, all that hair is exposed, and I can just go in and clean it up with my clippers. It's a little tricky to do around the chin, and that's why I'm going to use my scissor and my comb. Got her head tilted, but now I can see exactly where I need to cut there. I use my fingers here, and make sure you always are eyeballing that 1 millimeter longer. You don't want to go in and cut the hair too short. It's just little corners and zero elevation in the hair. Keep that hair nice and flat and pair it like close to the floor. You can see how nice and sharp that angle is, which really works for this particular hair length and her hair type. And this is basically the finished haircut. it's nice and sharp. We're just going to use some spray to smooth it out and prep the hair for our finger wave done with the flat iron. So now with a nice sharp angled bob like this, I like to style it a little bit wavy, more of a flat wave. And so what we're going to do with our flat iron is we're going to do a flat iron wave, which is really fun. And I prepped her hair with some flexible anti-frizz hairspray. And then now we're going to use the flat iron in a little bit of a different way. The nice thing about a 1-inch flat iron is that a 1-inch plate flat iron is that you can do a little more than just flat iron. You can do waves and curls. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm kind of doing a mock finger wave. And the trick to this is to use a section that's no thicker than 1 inch. So the thinner the section, the better. And you hold the hair straight out from the head, as I've done, and you just glide the iron in opposite directions, alternating and flipping your wrist, and then continuing that down the hair. So the trick to this is that you can get some creases in your flat ironing. So the way to prevent this is to press the iron onto the hair, but before you apply pressure, start to curve the iron. So you curve the iron and you apply pressure at the same time, and then you get a nice sort of even motion, and that's how you're going to get that nice wave. So the first wave I do at the head is always down to the floor, and then the second one is to the roof. So it's like a valley and a peak, a valley and a peak. And then the very last peak at the end allows the hair to kind of flip under, which is quite nice. And if you do encounter creases while you're trying to do this, just lightly tap your iron over the crease, holding it in the same position you originally used to do the wave. So again, we're going to do a valley. You can see a valley. So you apply the pressure and then just flip it out, and then a peak, same thing, and then another valley, and then another peak, flipping the hair under. And that's quite nice. It's quite modern looking, and it's a lot faster than doing this on wet hair and then brushing it out. And this took me a little bit of practice to learn, but it was very, very rewarding once I figured it out. And I found the trick was to do a nice glide over the hair once you're doing the valley, because it's so easy to get a crease. And then what I do is when I see a crease, I put my iron over that crease, and then I do my peak, or I do my valley that way in order to smooth out that crease. And if it's really bad, sometimes you can just ignore it and then just brush it out and it goes away. But here, what I've had to do is I've had to re-go over that section again. And sometimes, and that's okay, sometimes you have to do it multiple times. But what I'm doing is I'm not holding the hair with much tension. I'm just very loosely holding the hair, and I'm feeding it into the iron to give that wave some loose curl. Now, I always like to do the front first so that your model or client or child can see it in the mirror. And then I can work to the back in case you run out of time or they have to jump up. At least you've done the front nice. So again, start with a valley at the scalp, and then a peak, and then a valley, and just alternate your flat iron and feed the hair in. And underneath in the back, the more wave you do, the more volume you're going to get. So don't spend too much time trying to make the back underneath perfect. You're not going to see the underneath part because it is a blunt bob. the feature or the top section. So we really want to make sure those top sections look their best and really do like a strong curve with your wrist to get that deep wave in there. And I could go a little bit more with it in this particular section, but because it's underneath and I don't want a lot of volume, I'm just doing a very soft valley right by the scalp. And then as I get to the end, I really do those peaks and valleys a little more aggressive just to get, so you can see that shape more towards the bottom. And with our really sharp blunt bob, that shape becomes even more accentuated because of that curve at the bottom. And again, I'm using about 1 inch sections, about the width of the plate of the flat iron is what you kind of generally want to do, and go nice and slow with this. So if your flat iron has a temperature gauge, turn the temperature about halfway so that while you're learning, because that way you won't burn the hair that you're working with. When you're learning something new, you tend to be a little bit slower and you have to go over your sectioning more. And so by turning the flat iron heat down, you won't risk burning the hair that you're working on if you have to do multiple passes with your iron. And it's just the same motion over and over again. It's that valley and the peak and the valley and the peak. And so it looks very simple as a style, but it's one of the more challenging, more advanced styling techniques. Use it. I personally find, because a flat iron can be a little challenging when it leaves creases in your look, and they can be a little frustrating to press out. But just know, if you do get some creases, a lot of the times when you brush the hair or comb the hair out, they tend to just melt away quite easily. So don't worry too much if you're seeing a little bit of line here and there. Know that they will relax on their own. So right under the neck, I'm not spending too much time. I really want that valley at the base so that it reduces the volume, and more of the sharp edge of my cut is being accentuated with the volume towards the ends. She's got so much thick hair that if I was to create a ton of volume at the scalp, it would just become massive and not very modern for a teenager. So just get the back here nice and smooth. It can be a little challenging underneath, and because the hair is shorter, I find this technique to be a lot less challenging on longer hair because you have more options to do peaks and valleys. But again, curling and doing any styling with the flat iron can be slightly time consuming. So a lot of times I save these technical flat iron curls and waves for shorter bobs because they can be a little time consuming in a salon, but at home on your kids, you have probably not very much time either. So this finger or this flat ironing wave can be something good for prom or school photos, something as a special occasion to give your daughter or son if they want something cool done with their hair. A nice little finisher for this would be some beach spray, some sea salt spray, which would kind of give you a nice ropey wave. And a style like this could work on a boy who has long hair too, if you want to flat iron their hair, or if they have really curly hair and it's long and you want to flat iron it but you don't want it to look too straight or styled. Doing something like this can work because it just gives a little bit of a bend to the hair and doesn't make it look completely straight, even though it is still flat ironed. Same method I do around the ear. Her hair is getting a little bit thick, so I split the section in half. I don't want the width of the section to be more than an inch. When the section is too wide, it's harder to control the hair and get really nice close to the scalp. And it's hard to get the hair to lay nice against the scalp. So always keep the width of the section about 1 inch and the thickness about 1 inch as well. And with bobs, you want to usually, like for now, the look would be to kind of curl the hair under, but maybe the hair trends will change and you'll want to flip it out more at the bottom, which is totally easy to do. So you just reverse the wave, or your valley would be at the end instead of your peak. Right now I have the peak at the end, so that's giving that curl under. I'm going a little more flat at the crown here. You can see I've really bent that hair in at the scalp and really bent it out toward the mid shaft because I really want a deep wave moving up to the top of the head. I really want that accentuated, that nice wave. Not a lot of people walk around with wave style like this, so it's pretty fun to do and see the compliments that they get. Again, I've pre-sprayed the hair with an anti-frizz medium hold aerosol hairspray. Because I pre-sprayed her hair, I don't need to spray section by section. But if the hair is a little harder to style or a little more smooth and stubborn, you could spray each hair section that you flat iron with a very light workable hairspray. Don't use anything with too heavy of a hold, as it will gum up your flat iron and cause stickiness. So when you're using a flat iron and hairspray, make sure the hairspray is a flexible hold. And aerosol works, but if you don't want the packaging or the aerosol can, a liquid hairspray works very well here. Saturate the section with the liquid hairspray, but the trick when you're using a liquid hairspray is to brush it as it dries. So it does take a little bit more time to use a liquid hairspray because there is that step of brushing before you actually apply the heat to the section you're working on. But it is quite effective, so a liquid hairspray can work as well. And again, I'm just doing my peaks and valleys. It's the same hand movement each time, but you tailor how deep the valley is, so how much curve you're putting in the hair. And that's going to give you a deeper wave, or more of an S curve to it. So as you clamp the hair, you rotate your wrist 180 degrees and pull the hair through. I always keep one hand holding the ends of the section so that I can control them as I'm doing here. So it's a 180 and alternating 180, 180. And how nice is that looking? With the top section at the crown, I just go straight across the crown, and I'm going to do the same peaks and valleys. I don't want a ton of volume at the crown. I want the volume to be at the bottom, so I'm going to flat iron the hair down against the crown as well in that same, and create that valley at the crown. But if you wanted some height at the crown, you would flat iron for volume, which would be just flat iron straight off the head and then back, and then do your S curve towards the end. But we're doing 0 volume at the crown, so we're creating that valley with our first section and taking out most of the volume. And we really want these top sections to be really, really good. So I'm really rotating my hand. I'm really pulling that hair through slowly so that it's really nice and hot and really bouncy, and it stays really nice. So you can see as I shake it, any little lines that I might have had are just gone, and I'm spraying the hair from underneath. So to really accentuate the volume, you lift the hair up and spray it from underneath, and that's going to give that volume sort of at the bottom. And it's just a very soft wave that we're doing. So it can work for those kids who maybe you want to style their hair, but they are a little self-conscious about the way their hair looks. So this gives it a style without changing it too much or creating too much volume. And I want to really enforce the smoothness and the wave, so I just go section by section with this spray, especially around the front, just to give that extra hold. And our haircut is done. Obviously she doesn't like the volume, so she's touching it behind her ears. But you can see how nice that shape is towards the back and how well it's sitting, and that slight A-line look, and it's nice and sharp. Well, there you have it, and thank you so much for watching the blunt bob with the wave video.